talk me through 10,000 Disabled Interns. What is it? What does it do? How does it work?
We reach out to firms, we get them to pledge internships. We'll get students to apply if they have a disability or a long-term health condition. Candidates are typically matched up with firms of best fit, whether that's sector or values or their availability, and they'll be matched up with a firm and they'll be given an experience at the local living wage at a bare minimum. A lot of them are paid a lot more than that in the corporate sector, which is great. And so many students have benefited from the program. It's so great to see and to hear.
Welcome, Sami, to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to this chat. We have tried so hard to make this happen, so I'm really happy we're finally getting some time to get it done.
I think it's been like at least 6 weeks.
I know. It's absolutely wild when you actually put a time span on it, isn't it?
I know, but we're here now, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's dive in, shall we? So the first question that I ask everybody on the podcast is, how do you refer to your disability?
So I guess it depends on the context, really. I guess more generally, I refer to it as a brain injury because, most people don't have medical background or so I have cerebral palsy. So if I talk to a doctor or medical professional, I'll refer to it as cerebral palsy because they know what that is. They have an understanding of disability and what it entails. But in terms of the day-to-day, most people won't know what that entails. And when they're asking, they want to gain an understanding of what my disability is and how it affects me. So I feel as if a brain injury is the best way to describe that, because if I give them medical jargon, then it's not really going to kind of get them any closer to what they want to understand. So I normally describe it as a brain injury, unless it's someone who's more clued on, whether they're in the disabled sphere or the medical sector. I'll just refer to it as a brain injury.
I think that's like what you say about whether or not people are necessarily going to understand what you're saying about your disability, because it can be really difficult to try and explain what your disability is if someone asks you. I mean, obviously, this is if they've asked you in the right way, not just like some randomer on the street. But actually, there's a lot to be said for demedicalizing your own disability, because I think so often disabled people are medicalized so incessantly, and actually kind of taking that away and just being like, yeah, this is what it is. Like, it's not too complex to get your head around if I refer to it this way. I think that's a really great way to describe your disability, but also quite a thoughtful way as well, because you're actually thinking about someone else, which is actually really nice. And I'm not always sure that I do that.
Yeah, I think really when it comes to people asking, for the most part, I think they're just being nice, B, being inquisitive, and they want to better understand you. And I think the best way to do that is by describing it in layman's terms, as opposed to terms that may need a medical degree or medical experience, which is of no use to them at all.
It's so true. It's so true. And especially when you're talking about something like CP, which is a brain injury, but then also equally, not everybody knows that, because I didn't know that until really recently.
Yeah.
And I as a disabled person didn't realize that you acquired CP, that you weren't born with CP, which I think is wild, because so often when you do think about it, you automatically assume that you're born with cerebral palsy, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, when it comes to the acknowledgement of the disability, I think it's important to recognize it's on a more foundational level, as opposed to just starting at your understanding. You need to start at their understanding. So that's the approach I take, and I feel as if it's been useful so far.
Yeah. And with that, what was childhood like for you with CP?
I think, I mean, it's a good question. It's a very complex I think it was for the most part good. I think, primary school was very plain sailing. I had a lot of surgery I think from the age of 10, so year 5 to year 7, I was
Hmm.
not in school. So I left in year 5 and rejoined in year 7, which is a
Yeah.
bit of a jump because you go from being in primary school to rejoining school in secondary school with 16, 17-year-olds. So it was a bit of
Yeah.
a jump, but I think for the most part it was fine. I think in primary school, I think children are quite naive and innocent in the sense that they're a lot more accepting. I think secondary school was a little bit more complicated when it came to social
Hmm.
norms and expectations and what people considered, I guess, normal. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't really have any reservations when it came to that because I I guess I liked myself and I had kind of faith in myself as an individual, and for me that was all that mattered. And I guess that there's always different opinions when it comes to everything, not only disability. So I wasn't really too phased by I mean, there were stages within my education whereby I clearly didn't fit as much because I
Hmm.
was the first person sorry, the first disabled person to attend my school. Um, so they had no prior infrastructure when it came to disability.
Yeah.
Also, there was no experience not only with the students but also the staff. So there was a big learning curve for everyone, including myself and the staff and the students. And obviously, when it comes to your adolescence, your teenage years, it's more difficult to kind of fit in because you don't fit that prototype. But for
Yeah.
me personally, it didn't really bother me because I had faith in who I was as a person, so I wasn't really too fussed. But I mean, as a whole, it was not too problematic. But there were elements or stages whereby not being disabled would have been easier, of course, but
Hmm.
it wasn't too problematic at all.
I think it's so interesting what you say about how you weren't in school for like, what was it, 2 years?
Yeah. So for the first, I think from the age of 4 to maybe 8, I was in special educational needs
Hmm.
within my primary school, which was, I consider myself to be a reasonable intelligence. So when it came to be in a class with those that required intellectual help and had intellectual
Hmm.
difficulties, um, I felt as if I wasn't being challenged, and I was in that class for maybe
Yeah.
3 or 4 years, and then I was slowly integrated into mainstream education. So I really only had 1 year of mainstream education when I was 9 years old, and then I went into surgery, and I came back up when I was 12, and suddenly I was in year 7 with 1 year of mainstream education in a grammar school as well, just trying to keep up with the rest of my cohort, I guess. So
That is quite something, to be honest, though, isn't it? Really, like going from like one full year of mainstream education to then, being out of education through no fault of your own, and then going into secondary education, which in and of itself is a really difficult time for anyone. Like, I don't care what you say, being a teenager is
yeah,
rough.
cool.
Like, but then for you to go in with only one year almost under your belt, was it a lot of playing catch up, or was it actually like all right? Because if you said like you quite clearly back yourself, which is an amazing trait to have, but what was that like? Was it a case of catching up, or was it actually quite plain sailing for you?
So to be honest, I think I read a lot of books as a child. I enjoyed like
Yeah.
fiction and just reading. So I think that helped me to keep up even when I wasn't necessarily having that challenge within education.
Yeah.
So I do think that bridged the gap for some part. And even when I was in hospital, I went to a school within hospital and they gave me really challenging work every day. And even though I wasn't within a mainstream educational environment, I felt as if I was being pushed, I was being stretched, and
Mm.
I was learning. So by the time I got into secondary school, I passed the 11 plus while I was in rehab from my surgery. Um, so I felt as if because I got in, I almost deserved it
Yeah.
and I was good enough. So there wasn't as much pressure on me. Um, but there was elements of, I don't know what that is. I'm not used to this teaching
Yeah.
style, or, there were obvious gaps that were only really obvious for me, and it did take some time to catch up.
Yeah.
But I do feel as if there were things, like I said, reading independently or schools within hospitals that really benefited me and helped me from preventing to kind of fall behind.
So until you just said that you went to school and hospital, like I didn't realize that that was a thing. Like,
Yeah, there are like dedicated hospital teachers, and they're great, and like there are schools within hospitals, and I would wake up and I would have my medicine or whatever they wanted me to take,
hmm
do my physio, and then from like maybe after breakfast until the early afternoon, I would go in and just they had like a math um I guess game or program on a laptop, and I
hmm
play it every day. And there was no structure really. They just want you to develop academically in some way.
Yeah.
Some days they'll bring in musical instruments, or one day that they brought in a human brain for me to hold.
Oh,
And
I'd be sick. Oh,
I quite enjoyed it. Like I had to wear gloves, but I was like 10 years old, and it was
I
quite
bet loved
yeah,
it.
I did love it. But no, I mean they have dedicated staff and dedicated resources and programs for both children that are in their short term and long term
hmm
to continue their development while they're ill or while they're recovering.
Wow. I've already learned something new in the first like couple of minutes of this podcast that hospital schooling is a thing. Like who knew? I clearly did not.
Yeah, I feel like it's quite a fun job too. Like you get to interact with so many deserving
Mm.
children, and you get to follow your passion in the purest way. So I think if you are a teacher, I think a hospital teacher is the right way to go. I think that's what I would do if I was a teacher, to be
It's
honest.
actually a really like now that you've said it, I feel really silly that I didn't think that it was a thing before because obviously, like, it makes sense to have, a couple of teachers on your staffing for when kids are in for like prolonged periods of time who need help academically because you just wouldn't let them like not progress. So, as soon as you said it, it makes sense. But it's not until someone has said it that I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's a thing. That's a
Yeah,
job. Like I didn't know.
and like my school would give me homework. They gave me like long-term homework because they knew I'd be out for a while. But it was like
Yeah.
make a poster, and I was like, I don't really have the resources or the energy to make a poster. So I guess the hospital school was really useful in determining I guess the capacity I had to learn, and they
hmm
catered to my needs, which is really useful and really great. And I learned a lot in the hospital. Like I said, I was able to hold a human brain, and we used musical instruments, and we studied loads of different subjects. So it was really useful in terms of not only learning but also meeting other children that were also either recovering or were ill, or even
Yeah.
terminally ill that they still wanted to learn and just occupy their time with education.
Wow. Like I think that you had that structure has probably benefited you like endlessly because as you said like you went from having 1 year of mainstream education to then being in hospital, then having hospital education, and then going into what was it like 11 plus at
Yeah,
grammar school.
so I think it was during my rehabilitation when I was out of
hmm
school, but I couldn't attend school. I went in just to take the 11 plus, and thankfully I passed. And then
hmm
so I went into grammar school, which is relatively intense in terms of state school education. And, it's the more academically driven students that don't
Yeah.
go to private school, if you like. And the competition was so high in the school, and it was more. There was a lot of catch up, to be honest, because they were so capable. My peers were so capable that
Yeah.
I felt as if I needed to kind of match that level, and
Yeah.
and not having much formal education. I did find, for example, like writing essays, I had no clue. And then on my first week of school, like they were writing really complex essays, and I had to just take a crack at it and learn from it and grow from it. So there was
Mhm.
a steep learning curve.
Yeah. And interestingly, so you've gone through school, you've done what you needed to do. How was life after being in school, and how did your disability, or how does your disability impact your career choices?
Um, that's a you're full of good questions. I think after school, I think disability had less of an impact in a way because
Mhm.
when I went to university, I went to the University of Warwick after I left school. I feel as if it was almost a clean slate. There were no
Yeah.
preconceptions. People were more open to my disability. They were more open to I guess the social aspect of myself. So
Hmm.
um, in a way, I felt like it was easier, but also I had to live independently. I lived on campus.
Yeah.
I lived away from home, and there was that new aspect of living independently with a disability that I did really struggle with in my first year because
Hmm.
it's sort of acclimatizing to the environment, and there's like laundry and cooking and grocery shopping and still studying and getting everything else done and socializing, and there's so much that you're not really used to or ready for. But then
Hmm.
I think beyond that, I settled in really well, and I think it
Yeah.
was a really good experience for the most part at university. Um, and then beyond that, in my career, I don't think my disability impacts my career choices too much. I think,
Hmm.
I'd say, when I was maybe 7 or 8, I wanted to be a doctor, but I quickly realized maybe I'm not the best candidate. Actually, I wanted to be a footballer when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I'm a wheelchair
Yeah.
user, so that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. But I love football, so I thought maybe in the back of my mind it could be a possibility. But I moved on to being a doctor, and then I didn't really think I could be a doctor being a wheelchair user because when you're performing surgery, I don't think being this high up would be of use when performing surgery. But
Yeah.
I think beyond that, I moved on to more, I guess, academically driven careers.
Hmm.
Like I considered being a lawyer for a while. I actually applied to a few corporate law firms at
Hmm.
university, and I then considered finance, which I've moved on to more concretely. I work in audit at the moment. I've actually resigned recently from my role. I'm looking to move into I know it's a bit of an exclusive. I resigned like 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so I'm just looking for a bit of a change within finance and something a bit more. So audit is very examining previous and past finances. I'm looking for
Hmm.
something a bit more forward thinking, a bit more driven in that sense. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I'm looking for new roles. So if anyone's listening, let me know. But yeah, I recently resigned. I was there for 2 years. I really
Hmm.
enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I'm trying to move on to other things.
Yeah.
But in terms of career paths, generally when it comes to disability, I don't really. Obviously, there's limitations. Like when I was at university, I could never really be a barista or a waiter.
Hmm.
There are so many stereotypical student roles that I couldn't fulfill.
Yeah.
So obviously, but in that sense, yeah, I couldn't do that. But in terms of a career, I don't think there's much that has been withheld from me in that sense. I think, the things I want to do, if I want to work in finance, then I can. If I want to work in consulting, I can. Obviously, with 10,000 Disabled Interns, we open that door slightly more to provide for more,
Hmm.
less biased windows of opportunity into those sectors. And
Yeah.
that's something we're looking to push year on year. But for the most part, I don't think there was obvious bias. I think within application processes and the nature of disability when applying, it was a lot more difficult because
Yeah.
you don't really have as much time as other people to commit to 50, 60 applications with loads of different firms. And then beyond that, you'll email them saying you need reasonable adjustments, and then they'll get back to you a week later. By then, the role's already been filled. That's happened to me a few times. So there are barriers to entry, of course, but for the most part, I think if you want to pursue a career, I think you just go for it, because for the most part, there won't be barriers. If it's a more physical career choice, then obviously you may be limited depending on your disability. But if it's something academically focused or intellectually focused, just go for it. And just, I think firms are there to help you as much as they can, and they're increasingly becoming more aware of disability. So if you do drop them an email and just say, I need this, this, and this, they're normally happy to oblige.
Mm-hmm. And you've already alluded to it there, but talk me through 10,000 Disabled Interns. What is it? What does it do? How does it work?
So I guess, like I said, during my university experience as a student, I felt as if I didn't really have as much time as my peers to apply to internships with the same depth. And when you specifically when you attend, one of the most competitive universities, everyone's applying for an internship. And
Yeah.
I also come from a low income background, and to be honest, when someone first said to me, like, I remember coming back in autumn, and someone said to me, which internships have you applied to? I had no idea what they were talking about, because I was the first person in my family to go to university. I had no prior experience or exposure to internships. I didn't really, I'd heard about it in movies, but I didn't really know that was a thing
Like what
people
they
did.
were.
Yeah, I didn't know people actively applied to internships. So someone said to me, which ones have you applied to? And I was like, none yet. But I got some information from one of my friends. I went home and I looked up every conceivable internship. And even then, I found out that people apply to maybe 50 to 80 internships per year, and they each take from a few hours to a couple of days. I just didn't have the spare time to commit to those applications, and I really felt as if there was a gap in the market, or a space for a framework to better cater to disabled students. And that was why I started 10,000 interns. And I think in terms of how it works, we reach out to firms, we get them to pledge internships, so they'll commit a minimum of one intern. And it can go as high as 50, 60, 70, depending on the size and scope of the firm. But firms will typically pledge a minimum of one internship, and then beyond that, we'll get students to apply if they have a disability or a long-term health condition. And it's gone really well so far. And candidates are typically matched up with firms of best fit, whether that's sector or values or their availability, and they'll be matched up with a firm, and they'll be given an experience at the local living wage at a bare minimum. A lot of them are paid a lot more than that in the corporate sector, which is great. And so many students have benefited from the program. It's so great to see and to hear about their experiences. And we've had firms like Goldman Sachs, Lloyd's, AXA. I'm trying to think of sectors outside of finance. PwC, I guess that's kind of finance too. But we've had law firms, accounting firms, finance firms. We've had creative studios, media firms, marketing, fashion, the whole range of firms being involved in our program. And it's been such a beneficial experience to our interns.
Yeah, I can imagine, because as you so rightly said, quite a lot of the time disabled people, and particularly disabled students, don't have that extra time to fill in forms and internship applications, because they take a while. They take a long time. You've got to be quite detailed in them, and actually, if you're able to provide a service where you're looking at particularly at disabled students and being able to match them up with a good internship, then that's something that's really valuable, because we don't always have the extra time that other people have, and we don't always have the same access that other people do. But if you're able to match people up with the internships that they want in the sectors that they want, then that's a wonderful thing that you're able to do and able to give.
Yeah, I think also, like I alluded to briefly earlier, when it comes to applications, I think that there are certain aspects of applications that are so inaccessible to
Yeah.
disabled students. I think also, like I said, when it comes to letting them know about your adjustments, they may take a week to reply, or
Mm-hmm.
email inboxes can be flooded. So if they ask you to email them your reasonable adjustments and clarify your needs, and then in a week they'll get back to you, and the application process is on a rolling basis. They've already started taking interviews while you're going back and forth explaining your needs, then you're immediately at disadvantage.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're pairing people who need each other together. And I think that that's a really like great way to go about getting more disabled talent out there, regardless of what sector it is, because the world knows that we all need more disabled talent in every single industry. So I think it's really wonderful that you're able to provide that service and make sure that disabled people are still thought about when it comes to internships, because quite often they're not. And everything that you've said about the extra time and the inaccessibility of the forms to even start getting an internship, and even when you're thinking about, as you said, like sending in your reasonable adjustments, as soon as you've done that, they've already filled the spot because the time is gone. So actually, how great is it that disabled students can now join? But interestingly, we've spoken about childhood, we've spoken about university, and how there was challenges presented in both. And I was wondering, do you have a piece of advice for a younger version of yourself going through those changes?
Um, when you say younger, how young are we talking?
As young as you want to give yourself this piece of advice. I never want to put an age limit on it, because I just feel like some people would give themselves advice at 8 years old, or some people would give themselves advice at 18 years old, and they would probably still be really valid. So whichever feels right to you.
I feel like the advice will be different at different stages, to be honest. But I guess I don't think I'd have much advice for me as a young child, because I feel as if I did pretty well. But I guess as a teenager, I'd say, or maybe even going into that secondary school environment, it would just be.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you just stay true to yourself, um, irrespective of whether or not you have a disability, I think this is very broadly applicable. I think there are, I guess, trends or maybe elements of life that you can lean into, or
Mm-hmm.
to tap into to maybe make life easier on yourself, make yourself more, make yourself fitter more, I guess. But if that's only you, then there's no need for you to do that, because it's all short term in the end. Like, well, life is so long in a sense, and that period of your life will only be 4 or 5 years, and there's no need for you to change who you are in order to make something of yourself, or to succeed, or to fit in even, because
Yeah.
eventually there'll be elements of yourself that will seamlessly fit into other aspects of society that aren't necessarily catered to or appreciated within that adolescence or a teenage environment, because
Mm-hmm.
I think teenagers can be very narrow in their appreciation of what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. And
Yeah.
when you reach adulthood, that opens up, and there's no need to really conform to such narrow expectations.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. There's no need for you to conform to narrow expectations. I think that's something that everybody can take that on board, because you're right. Teenagers are just, do you know what? It's hard work being a teenager. Oh,
They,
you
they,
couldn't pay me enough money to go back and be a teenager. You really couldn't.
Yeah, I think, I enjoyed it a lot, but in some aspects, but in other aspects, they can be quite fickle. They can be quite, I guess they can be quite shallow, and they're all,
Oh, I
I feel
think
like,
it's the time of your life when everything's changing, isn't it? It's like the first time you're really experiencing like your body's changing because of hormones, and everybody just wants to fit in, and it's awkward because everybody's changing at different times, and things are happening that you didn't realize could happen, and it like, and also nobody gives you a handbook for those years. And to be fair, I'm not even sure if someone did give you a handbook, you'd read it, but there's so much change that goes on bodily, hormonally, all of the above. It's a difficult time to try and navigate, especially when boys and girls are going through it together. And it's a really interesting microcosm of society when we look at it. But actually, do I want to go back and be a teenager again? Probably not. Like you'd have to pay me an awful, awful lot of money. Like I'm talking in the millions to go back and be a teenager again.
I think when it comes to kind of the expectations on a teenager, I think it varies depending on because people grow at different rates, people mature at different rates, not only physically but intellectually, and there's
Mm,
such a kind of gap when it comes to, I guess, your cohort and everyone's trying to fit in but also be their own person, and there's this disparity that's quite conflicting, and I think it's an interesting time. It can be a fun time, but it's also very, I guess, awkward in the sense that no one really
yeah.
knows who they want to be or what they are or what is right, what is wrong, and they're just looking to kind of ride the wave, I guess, until they reach adulthood. So I think being disabled adds a layer to that.
Yeah. There's
Um,
another layer added to being a teenager in itself is awkward, but then being a disabled teenager is like it's like a little extra spice, isn't it? Like here's a little bit more complicated.
yeah, yeah, of course. But I think, I mean, it wasn't terrible at all. And beyond that, I think when I reached adulthood, when I went to university, I think everything kind of smoothed out, and it wasn't.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, like I said, childhood was complex, but not too. It was challenging in an intellectual sense, but it wasn't challenging personally. I guess I enjoyed
Mhm.
my childhood, and then beyond that, teenage years were slightly trickier, and then you go on to university, you go on to adulthood, and everything kind of worked out. So, going back to your question, I think my advice would just be to ride the wave and just wait for things to work themselves out.
Yeah. So through hardship, I like to think that if you've learned something about yourself, then there's been some growth. And I was wondering, through any hardship that you've faced, is there a particular positive trait about yourself that you're really proud of?
Uh, I think I'm a very hard worker. I'm
Mm-hmm.
quite driven in every sense, whether that's my work or, I mean, really anything. I'm quite driven.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really fold easily. I get things done. I move on to the next milestone. I'm also quite adaptable in terms of when you have a disability, you have to adapt a lot or you have to problem solve. I'm very,
Yeah.
adaptable. Be my perspective on things is very positive. I'm very grateful for everything I have, and nothing really phases me. I can take things on the chin and move on. But I think in general, I take life as it comes. I'm very driven and ambitious in terms of my work and even my personal life. I don't really think there's anything I can't do, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that would be it.
I really like that you said, that you're really ambitious, because I think a lot of people don't realize that disabled people can also be ambitious, and that like disability and ambition can coexist, and that's something that can be absolutely fine. Whereas a lot of people don't necessarily put two and two together. They think just because you're disabled doesn't mean that you don't have ambitions, like you've got no drive, like you've got no goals to get. And actually, that couldn't be further from the truth, because every single disabled person I know happens to have like big goals that they want to achieve in their life, or they have little goals that are really meaningful to them. And I really love that actually a positive trait that you like about yourself is that you have ambition, because I think it's super important.
Yeah, I think really it's kind of one of the building blocks of being an adult. You need something that drives you. You need something that pushes you forward from day to day. And when it comes to ambition, I do have a lot of goals, but even if you only have one goal, I think that goal to look forward to is very important in giving meaning to your day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm. I only have one final question for you, Sami, and that is, are you disabled and proud?
Yeah, of course. I think I mean that's quite an easy question. I think if you're not, then you're only being detrimental to yourself. I think if you do have a disability and you shy away from that, or you're not proud of that, or you're almost ashamed of that, then you're only making life more difficult for yourself because you're going to have to face it either way. And if you're not proud or you're ashamed of that or you shy away from that, I think you're going to achieve less, you're going to live less of a life almost. And I think if you're on the flip side, if you're able to tap into that, like you've done, like I've done, and make something else of it, then it multiplies the I guess the way in which you live your life
Mm-hmm.
so much. And yeah, I just think if you're willing to a focus on the positives and b I think you just to an extent ignore it and just live your life how you would have done any other way, then you're able to commit to it and achieve so much. And like I said, if you're ashamed of your identity, even more broadly, whether it's your gender, your race, anything, then you're going to achieve less. You're going to have less confidence in yourself. You're going to be less happy in your day-to-day life. So I think just embrace everything you are, irrespective
Mm-hmm.
of whether it's like I said, race, sexuality, gender, disability. Embrace it all as it comes, and because you can't change it really, so you may as well embrace it. And then beyond that, just tap into it and just enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Oh, I've loved that. I love what you said about just like embracing it and actually just tap into yourself, because you're your own best knowledge, and that's wonderful. I have really enjoyed this chat, Sami. I want to say thank you for coming on today, and I'm so glad we managed to sit down and make this work. And I think it's been super interesting, particularly talking about 10,000 disabled interns. I think that's a really valuable source, particularly for disabled students to have access to. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.